Hello, good evening. Good evening. I am Jacob Brooks, the Exhibitions and Public Programming Officer here at the New York Studio School, and I'm honored to welcome you to our Spring 2025 Evening Lecture Series. A reminder to those of you in person on 8th Street to please silence all cell phones during tonight's event. We will reserve a time at the end for a Q&A with the audience. For those of you in the room, please raise your hand and we will bring a microphone to you so our online audience can hear your question. For our Zoom audience, you can submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. After the lecture, I invite you to join me and our guests downstairs in the clay room for some light refreshments and further conversation. The New York Studio School is grateful for the following funders for their support of the 2024-2025 Evening Lecture Series: the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the Robert Lehman Foundation, the Samuel H. Kress Foundation, and many generous individual contributors. Now I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. Candida Alvarez is an artist whose primary materials are painting and drawing. Her abstractions are composed from a personal narrative that is captured through mobile photography. Beginning with the collage-like exchange, Alvarez creates a space that eventually unfolds into drawings, resulting in several layers of overlapping. The works evolve through an intuitive process where color becomes the pictorial architect between shape and line. Abstraction becomes a sense of wonder that tracks the formal play and lives within Alvarez's compositions. Alvarez received her MFA from the Yale School of Art in New Haven, Connecticut in 1997 and taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for 25 years, where she is now a professor emeriti. Solo exhibitions include the Monira Foundation at Manna Contemporary in Chicago, Illinois in 2024, moniquemeloche, Chicago in 2023. Notable group exhibitions include Forecast Form, Art in the Caribbean Diaspora, 1990s to Today at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and ICA Boston 2023, No Existe, El Mundo, Poshuracán, Puerto Rican Art in the Wake of Hurricane Maria at the Whitney Museum of Art in New York 2022. Public collections include the Whitney Museum of Art in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Pérez Art Museum in Miami, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, El Museo del Barrio in New York, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Seattle Art Museum, the Luma Foundation, the DePaul Art Museum in Illinois. Recent awards and fellowships include the 2024 Trellis Art Fund Grant, the 2022 Ford Mellon Foundation for Latinx Artist Fellowship, the 2022 Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Art, the Helen Frankenthaler Award for Painting in 2021, and the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant in 2019. In 2023, Alvarez was an artist in residence at the Luma Foundation in, I'm sorry, pardon my pronunciation, Arles, thank you. I was overthinking it. The Arles Foundation in France and the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. In 2024, Alvarez was the Alex Katz Chair of Painting at the Cooper Union in New York. She currently lives and works in Baroda, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois. Alvarez is one of 18 artists selected to produce a permanent commission for JFK's forthcoming Terminal 6 project, which will open in 2026. She will present a major solo exhibition at El Museo del Barrio in New York, opening April 25th. In addition, Alvarez is opening an exhibition at Gray Galerie in New York with Bob Thompson on April 30th. She will also be a panelist presented by the Latinx Project on April 9th, as in next Wednesday, entitled Rican and Diaspora Visual Art at NYU. Allison Glenn is a New York-based curator and writer focusing on the intersection of art and public space through public art and special projects, biennials, and major new commissions by a wide range of contemporary artists. She is artistic director of The Shepherd, a 3.5-acre arts campus, part of the newly christened Little Village Cultural District in Detroit. Glenn has been named curator of the next Toronto Biennial of Art, opening in late 2026. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to our guests.
Thank you so much. Can you hear us okay? Excellent. Thank you to the New York Studio School for inviting us to be in dialogue today. Candida, I'm so excited to jump into this conversation with you.
It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. So I've known Candida. We were trying to do the math. We won't do the math. We're both very young. And we've known each other for some time.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, at least 15 years. I was in graduate school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Candida was the dean, actually. Yeah. So I figured we could really just kind of jump right in and talk about your incredibly illustrious career.
Oh, how much time do we have?
We don't have enough time.
Thank you all for being here, taking some time out from your studios. And it's always wonderful to, interact with a new audience and to see my long-term colleague almost now, right now.
Yes,
she's colleague.
I hope so.
So it's a wonderful thing to live a long life and to have all these amazing, remembrances and interactions that in the beginning you don't really expect. And so when you dedicate yourself to being this artist, what does that really mean? What does it look like? It's more than just being in the studio, being quiet. It's a lot of things. It's about participating in the world. And so I'm grateful to have had all these opportunities and being here. So public art.
When we were preparing this dialogue, I thought that this commission in 1994 was the first public art project you had done. And Candida reminded me there was actually one about a decade prior that was part of the CETA project. So maybe we start there and then jump into this commission for PS 306.
Well, first I want to apologize because I don't have any images from that time. But the CETA Artist Project was, I think, 78 to 80, something like that, and it was funded, federally funded, and it gave opportunity to artists to work full time. So we were salaried, and it was supposed to be 1 year, and we ended up, some of us, having 3 years. So during that time, one of my projects was to work at the Langston Hughes Library, which was in Corona, Queens. And they wanted a mural. So I decided I would work around the poems of Langston Hughes, who I didn't know that well, because it was actually named after him. The library was named after him. And so I did my research, and I fell in love with his work. So the whole space was just sort of depictions of moments in some of the poems that I decided to work on. So there was like a woman, one of them was based on this wonderful essay about him sort of being asked to lecture, he was being congratulated at the end of his life, and it was called The Banquet. It was a short story written, these were stories written by Langston Hughes, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, the banquet was really kind of touching and poignant, and it was about an artist who wasn't being celebrated during his life. And at the end, they gave him this banquet, and he got up to speak they were having chicken, eating chicken wings, and it's very descriptive, and you can kind of get this image of somebody chewing on their bones, and he got up to speak, and he said, he kind of chastised, in a way, the audience. He said, why did you wait so long, so to speak, to honor me? It takes so long. And so it was it was witty, and so I did this image of a young man kind of holding his head up like this with flowers coming, like on top. And so I remember that was sort of it was a stairwell mural that I did. So this was right in the center. So it became like the centerpiece, right?
Amazing.
And so then there were angels and other things. So that was the first time, and it was all hand painted. And I had this way of doing it where I remember painting the faces and mixing the colors, and I was sort of using a brush and sort of airing it, like sort of feathering it, like you would do your makeup. And so there were like these little wispy spaces. So I had this outline, but then there were these wispy lines that came out. And I remember this young woman come in. She said, "Why are you painting outside the lines?" I said, "Because I really, smooth finish, right? And so I would just go and clean it up afterwards. But it was interesting, how we devise our own techniques, right, to getting to what we need or we think we need. So anyway, so that was my first experience sharing my work with the public that I really didn't know, right? But it was people and young people who use the library. So I thought it was very important because it taught me so much about something I didn't know.
Where was the library again?
It was in Corona, Queens,
Okay.
and it was knocked down
Okay.
a few years ago. So I have to hunt around for some images. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, I'm curious, how did this come about? So I'm going to scroll through. This is one of the installation views of the 6 window designs that were commissioned by the Board of Education. And I have so many questions. These are preparatory sketches, and we'll get back to these. But essentially, we're talking about the mid-90s. And I'm so curious how this commission came about. I think from a kind of administrative fundamental position, what was the process? And then we'll talk about the ways that you conceived of the work.
I feel bad, but I don't really remember.
That's okay.
I remember I was pregnant when I first was submitting a proposal and interviewing. I just remember my young son being born. It was just, I think I was like 8 months or something like that.
You were birthing a lot
I was
at that time.
Yeah, right. And so the process itself was kind of murky. I think it was, usually these are commissions where you are asked to submit proposals. I think it came through. I can't really remember because I know, like in Chicago, you have to submit slides to a registry, right? And then curators will go through and select artists. I believe this was kind of done the same way. There must have been some, I was asked to submit, and so then they interview maybe 6 people, right? And so you never expect to get. I never expected to get anything, so I was always surprised.
Of course.
But so the project here was for a school, and so I think one of the things, and I have to share that this is the first time I'm ever really talking about this. And this is a project that nobody will ever see because it's a middle school, right? And so in New York, you can't just walk into a school.
Right.
So these works are really for the students. So I thought a lot about that. Like, what could I do that could somehow uplift or give something through vis-a-vis the syllabus or a kind of learning experience for them. And so that's why I called it What Do You See? I kind of wanted them to start looking and noticing things. And also, for me, I kept thinking about their curriculum. What are they studying? And so, but everything about botany or, the landscape, the environment, geometry, mathematics, and also biology. So I took 3 subjects. There were 6 windows. So that gave me room to play. And mind you, I've never worked with glass, but that was what they wanted, somebody who could work with glass, for the windows. And so...
Well, what I think is incredibly striking about this project, and I think really kind of appropriate for this dialogue today in the school, is how the sketches really translated into this public work. Like in reviewing these slides over the past couple of days, I'm really struck by how the sketches translated so seamlessly. So even if you weren't working with stained glass before, this exercise in kind of thinking through a new medium and material, being primarily a painter, was a very successful one.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, as someone who primarily works in public art, it's kind of a risk to work with artists in public space who haven't prior.
I was really lucky. I I actually had to interview people who could fabricate, like the fabricators, right? So I asked people, and I had three clients, three potential clients that I interviewed. And so there was that whole learning curve, what do you ask? How do you determine that? So I guess a lot of it is based on personality too, and their professionalism, right? So I decided I chose Bill Cummings from the Cummings Studios, and they were located in North Adams. And I remember driving, I lived in Brooklyn, and driving up there and staying in his home. I was a guest, and he had a big, huge, older home. And he's been in business for so long. And he basically, I think for me, it was the enormity of it in a way. It was like, how do you, like, I have a palette, so how does that translate into a glass palette, right? And then you're looking at sheets of glass. And these were all, so he took me to the factory, or to the place where all, because they're brought in from France and Germany, and, so it was this just really busy, huge, almost like a supermarket full of glass sheets. And it was so seductive and beautiful, and yet kind of scary, because there were rectangles, right? You keep thinking, well, how does that get all cut up so that it fits these curves? It's just like you overthink in a way, but he was very confident, and he basically took me by the hand. He said, come on, we're going to choose the palette. So, of course, the drawings were essential. They were describing how the color was going to work, and so that's how he was guided. And he helped me to figure it out. And a lot of the glass was antique; it was really old, and it had very unique. And then they had their whole setup there, so you can see how they would cut it, and then put it together. But what was so beautiful for me was that I had my own little special room. The panels were set up like this in fours, and then they created an easel for me right in front of another glass window, so I could see really clearly. So they would first put all the pieces together, and then we would look at it, and then if it felt right, I was like, okay, let's go, or I would say, no, that color's too off. But the intriguing thing is that this work was comprised of, I think, over 2,000 pieces of glass. Wow. And I learned how to paint, I can't remember the technical name for painting on glass, it's very old, but there's a particular paint that you have to use, but each one of these pieces was handled by me. So each piece I actually shaded. And so oftentimes you don't realize when you look at stained glass all that drawing that goes into it, or the painting. It holds the light down and also creates depth. And so I felt like I really loved that look. So it looked like a print to me. And I think I think that's why it was mesmerizing. I just felt, there was one day when I had this, I almost felt like I was in an out-of-body experience, like sort of looking through the windows, sensing this glass. And for me, it was it was one of the purest experiences of living color in my life. And I remember thinking that it's almost like you feel like you kind of understand like the medieval artists, who were painting and using this as a material. It just felt so natural for me in a way, and I was like, wow, this is so extraordinary. I was very confident with it, and so here it is, and I haven't looked at it in a long time. I've been invited to go to the school. I can go to the school whenever I want, and as I said, I really want to talk to some of the students about it, right? So I'm looking at it again. I've never really seen these projected, but they did a good job. I mean, those things
look
are up,
so good.
They're up really high. The fact that this continues to live is just a beautiful. This technique is so old and so beautiful. It was just a pleasure and an honor, really, to have this work. And so I think that idea of piecing things together, I mean, clearly it's so important in my work, this idea of a kind of an assembly, right? And a dismantling at the same time of an image. So it just made sense.
It makes complete sense. And what I really appreciate, to kind of lay the foundation also back into the studio and the painting practice, is that can you speak to this audience a bit about how you conceive of a painting and how your kind of daily experience in the world informs the studio, as well as how the studio informs the world, as we'll see later on in some future projects.
Well, thank you for that question. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy question to answer, really, because I don't follow rules. I kind of trust something else, which is I sort of follow a need. I have a sense about something, like I want to see a certain color, a certain color palette, or there's an image that I see that is very curiously interesting that I want to dismantle. I never really believed in prescription, although for this kind of work, there's a methodology that you have to follow. You'll kill yourself, But I just want to say one thing that I forgot, was that I already told you it was over 2,000 pieces of glass. When I got to the last window, it fell.
No.
And I was there. I was the only one there. And it just like kind of rained glass. And I just stood really still. And I was not hurt at all. But I was just like, oh my God, it is glass. So the vulnerability of that. So it's beautiful and it lasts a lifetime if you take care of it, but it can break, right? And we see a lot of like churches that use, there's a lot of care in sort of conserving this material and this, because, I grew up looking at it. I went to a Catholic church that was actually completely destroyed. I was shocked in Brooklyn, it was a church that was built, St. Anne's. I couldn't believe that they just completely dismantled that church. I thought there was a law that said you couldn't do that, right? That the churches were supposed to be up forever. It was fantastic. It was a beautiful church, the most beautiful stained glass windows that you could imagine. And so I think that point of view, just the idea of looking out at something and receiving something back, right? Because when sunlight hits stained glass, there's a prismatic effect that happens, and it's captured. It's like when the sun rays come in, where does it go? Well, it bounces all over the room, and what happens? Well, there are these beautiful shadows that are created and these shapes that are created. And so there's this idea of shape-shifting, or the idea that something is shaped in the world. We can talk about shadows. We can talk about the body. It flattens out, when
let's talk about it in relationship to this commission
there's another one
that you realized in the Bronx. The Bronx loves you.
I guess so.
Yeah, they really do. That you've had 2 major commissions there. And so this one was created about a decade after the PS 306, B is for Birds in the Bronx. Now, was this also a kind of RFP that you replied to? Right.
Yeah. So, I just thought Bronx, and I flirted with the word Bronx, and I was like, it. B is for the birds. So I thought about all the birds that could fly in the Bronx. So every window is sort of a dedication to one of the birds, like the pigeons, or the oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget all the birds that I was looking at, but. Basically, this was a whole different project, and I worked with a different studio that was located in Chicago. It was the Bode Studios, and these are called wind walls. And so these are like blocks of glass, very different than stained glass, very different. And so there wasn't any hand painting done here, but it was all this assemblage of different colors, right? And so I wanted transparency, so I used some clear glass because I really wanted the birds to be the activators, it's the way in and through space and time, so they became the most transparent things, right? And everything, the world around them is what was holding it together. So yeah, it was a different experience. You're on a train, waiting for the train. So this one lives closer to humans, right? It's easier to access. It's in the world. I haven't been back in a long time to see it. but they're there. Hopefully they'll be there for a long time, you know. And so it was a different kind of experience. It was, but there is something about transparency that I love, and working with sort of a dismantling an idea to make it interesting. So it's a representation, it's a figuration, but it's also an abstraction, right? Because when color enters those blocks, you know, color does something that it kind of dismantles meaning on some level, right? It just kind of captivates you if you're really looking. And it allows for something that we call abstraction to come in, right? It's a kind of disorientation or a dismembering of something familiar. Any questions?
Well put.
I want to say, any questions?
We have a few more to get through before questions, but not too many. And so including Comme des Garçons, I think was really important because this was an opportunity, again, to talk about the painting practice in an expansive way, right? So you were invited to create prints for designs for the fall 2017 menswear collection. And I actually remember when this was announced, I was so impressed because I know you, and I was really excited to know someone who had been given this opportunity.
Well, thank you. My son was over the top
I believe it.
when Pharrell Williams was on the cover of Vogue wearing one of these. My son called me up and said, "Mom, Pharrell is wearing your clothes." I said, "It's a collaboration," but I made me happy that he noticed, you know, he was into it. But he never wore the clothes. He has the, you know, he never really actually wore them. He has them, but he never wore them. But I just have to say that this was totally unanticipated. And when I got the email from Ray Kawakubo, all right, so you get this email from the studio of Ray Kawakubo. So what did I think? I said, is this fake?
I thought it was fake.
So I thought it was really fake. And so I sent it to my friend, Terry Myers, and I said, do you think this is real? Do you think Ray's writing me to collaborate with her? I said, why would she want me to go? You know, blah, 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 blah. He says, I think this is real. So I got in touch, and basically I curated my end of it. So I just sent her images that I thought, of paintings that I thought that could work.
Right.
And then she chose what she wanted to use. And so basically, it's so beautifully done. I mean, the tailoring, the material. I mean, it was just beautiful. And I think, how did I feel? It felt weird to see one of my paintings walking down the street.
Sure.
Oh, it's not really one of my paintings, but it's like this aspect or dimension, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun. It was sort of another kind of structure, right?
Mm-hmm. Another platform.
Yeah, another platform. And I kind of let go of this kind of arrogant idea that paintings should only be on walls. You know what I mean? I just felt like we could share the work in different ways. It's not. I just felt it's still not the painting. It's just a kind of, it's a way to share, let's say, you know, you're writing an essay, it's a paragraph, right, in a longer story of something. And I like that idea that it could be in the world, and maybe it's not the most accessible collection, right, because her work is actually very expensive, you know. I think that's the only thing, but I think there was something very interesting about the dismantling of something, you know, that's kind of has more of a hierarchy, you know. I mean, to have worked in the studio for so long and then to all of a sudden look out and you're in Paris, you know, there's a runway and there's these models coming down the runway. I just wish I could do some women's wear. I mean, it was all men's. It was the men's couture and the boys' shirt. So there were two lines that I was asked to do. And so they don't really fit me, otherwise I probably would wear them.
I really think a woman's would be great. Like I could see a very big skirt, like something very drapey. But this is, I mean, it's still impressive. Those pants look fun, and the tailoring is probably incredible. And how many people get a chance to collaborate with a designer, you know?
That's true.
Okay, so then around that same time, I'm sure you were creating this work at about the same time as the collaboration, but you were invited by the city of Chicago for the Year of Public Art to create this incredible latex ink on mesh painting for the Riverwalk. So a 27-foot by 200-foot painted mesh mural. And I have so many questions about this work, but I think it's also, I want to kind of frame the question for you. When Candida makes paintings, oftentimes they're influenced by her daily derive, things that are happening in the world, a photograph she might see, things in the studio. She really kind of collects information and inspiration from multiple places. And when you get to know the work, you start to see where these references then become abstractions. But they are taken from actual things you experience in the world. And I really appreciated the feedback loop that this project presented, because you created a massive public painting that then became inspiration for some works that we'll see later on in the talk. It became inspiration for the studio. So I just wanted to say that, and then ask this question of, how did you create this? And also, how did you conceive of it? Did you personally paint all the pieces? Was it fabricated? How, like, kind of speaking about, the connections between this kind of work and this one.
Well, I would say that they're all fabricated by somebody else, right? The ideas are all mine, pretty much. But I needed help. So it's a way of sharing the making, right? Which is all new, right? That's all new, and it's just a wonderful opportunity. And so 2017, it was a few months. I had a very big show, one of my first solo shows in that beautiful cultural center, and it was the first time I had so many people. I think there were over 60,000 people that went to visit that show, because they always, they have this little mechanism where they have the numbering. They could tell how many people enter that room. And so I already, I had been in Chicago, living there, teaching there, so I had a really strong commitment to the city, and so it was just a wonderful way to be honored in a city where you've given so much of your energy, right, and creativity. And so I felt really lucky to have that show there, and to have all these amazing people support the catalog, and kudos to again Terry Myers for organizing it all, and who was a colleague also at the Art Institute at the school. And so a few months later, I had this invitation to do this work, and actually this happened in 2017. I want to just say that my father died in 2017 as well, in Puerto Rico. That was 3 months before the hurricane happened. So 2017 was a very full year, and I had just come back from Paris, right? That was about 3 months earlier, and then my father passes, and then this happens, right? So it was really, I think that's, if I'm remembering, because your brain kind of loses something when there's a memorial, there's a funerary event in your life. You can't always hold everything together. It's like a really hard place to hold. But I just remember having this up, and the feeling was, wow. It was huge. It was about 217 feet wide by 17 feet high, and so there was somebody in the city that was, the city has a lot of banners there's always a lot of advertisements, and so there's a company, I forget their names right now, but they did the printing, and basically I went back to my studio, and I had all this material, and I, chopped it up, and then it became it became a digital file. I hired a digital artist. I call her my digital paintbrush, Eileen Mueller. Herself an artist, and so she helped me digitize everything and put it together, and so that's how we created that huge banner. Okay. And it was called Howlings Soft Painting. Soft paintings, and howlings referred to the knowledge of coyotes in Chicago, right? I just
have some howlings paintings,
right? I just love that idea that there's these, every once in a while people see coyotes.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know. I've never seen one,
a coyote.
But they kind of live. It's from the old days, they just kind of still hang around. But this whole idea that maybe they're howling somewhere, right? But
I love that.
But I don't know. I mean, we have pigeons and they coo, right? But coyotes kind of howl, right? And so I wanted to howl in a way. But anyway.
I mean, I think it's quite impressive as well, again, this way that the work translates in public space, right? Like, often artists, when they move into public space, are not as close to the work. They're not touching it every day, right, in the production. But you are as close as you possibly can be. And there is a sense of letting go, right? There's a sense of trust in that process and letting go and relying on a fabricator who can make something at scale to translate your ideas. Because they really still are, you know, from this collaboration, it's a translation of your ideas, right? This also is a translation of your ideas. And so is this. And then the part that connects it so nicely back to the studio are these air paintings that came from the tests.
Right, the proofs, right. So there were a lot of proofs that were made for that banner, that mural, digitized mural, right, under the Wacker Drive. And Wacker Drive is this huge underground. I mean, it's a way to connect traffic, right? And so right now we have an Apple store there, right? But before that, it's a beautiful point of intersection, right, for the boats coming in and the cars going across. So it's a very busy intersection. But anyway, so I took all the proofs that I needed to review, and I took them with me to my studio, and I just had them in my studio, not really knowing what I was going to do with them. And then the hurricane happens in Puerto Rico around this time, and so it gave me a way to just paint and not have to deal with ordering supplies, or it was just a way to sort of use this material that was completely new and fresh, and just sort of it just kept me busy. But at the same time, we were calling and trying to find, my mother and my sister were there, because my sister stayed. I was there, and then I left, and my sister went to Puerto Rico to stay with my mother because my father had just died. So anyway, fortunately, the house that we have there, nothing really happened. A lot of trees fell, but other than that, we did find my sister and mother were fine, but there was weeks where nobody knew anything, right? So these were being made as this was all going on, right? And so, and then it took me a long time to figure out how to install these works. At first, I was never going to show them. It was like drawings to me, in a way, kind of laid and flat. But because they were so big, I just painted on the floor, and then I would also use the walls. And so I was pouring paint onto them. I was, mushy, and I was sort of responding to the print that was on the surface, right? So that was what was the beginning of it. And these were already from collages that I, quote unquote, that I put together, right?
I was going to say,
yes.
The print on the surface came from the studio.
Yeah, from the studio.
And these were proofs that then went out into the world and were tests for the project.
Yes.
And then they came back
That's
into
right.
the studio, and then you, again, kind of had an engagement with.
I activated them back into life.
Thank you.
Yes.
And what I love about these is there's a verso, so there are these really fantastic, quite unique freestanding paintings that are sculptural. And I would argue this is incredibly influenced by 40 years of public art, right? 40 years of various public art projects and practices you've had the opportunity to delve into. And there's something about the body with these.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to them privately as paintings with little feet.
Not private anymore.
Not private anymore, but I think it's kind of funny because it took so long but I knew it had to have something. I wanted to elevate them somehow, and they almost are like chalkboards, but they're not. And also, these kind of structures that exist in life when, you have conferences, public, when you're teaching or, you use these tools, right? But lecturing, whatever. So, but I loved, it took a while, but Dan Sullivan, was the person who actually fabricated them for me. It took a long time. It took about a year. They went from a phase, I was working with somebody else, from wooden structures to aluminum structures. And then there's a rod inside that's very beautiful that's wood, and that's what holds it together. So, but I love the lightness of the aluminum, and I basically now use the aluminum as stretchers, right? I mean, so they're kind of light, and they just have a body to them, what I like. But I like that I didn't know what I was going to do with them, and it was so nice that moniquemeloche was open to showing them. I was having a show just prior to this show opening at Gavlak, LA. So there was other paintings that I went on to show there, but Monique took the risk of showing these because
I love these. I think it's so brilliant. And the seriality, the repetition, I think it points to your time with Silhouette, your kind of relationship to that practice, right? Which we didn't dive into.
No, but also I want to say it's also very much about transparency, right? The fact that light can go through it. So like the stained glass windows, right? But also telescopic. Like for me, there was always a dream that I have, and maybe it will come later on, to do a work where there's like a channel, where it's almost like it's a long view, right? Where these works appear through each other. So it's kaleidoscopic. That's the right way of saying it.
Kaleidoscopic, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so, but that's what I loved about it, was that they were light, they could be hung, they could be moved. They felt like a body. They were a body, but they were also air. And one of the things that was so intriguing about this project was that I learned about some of the work that was happening under the bridge. So in order for them to create this material, this banner-like woven material, they had to the engineers had to rework the window size inside so that it wouldn't pull the bridge down. So there was a way, so I love this idea that air was going through, and they had to think about the air going through. So for me, that was really so important in these works. There was something about that, that the air flow would also be a part of the work. And because of Puerto Rico and because of all of that, all wrapped up, I also thought that the aluminum is kind of a nod to the airplane too, right? There's something about that as a material that we kind of know but don't really know. But that was the first show I ever had where there was basically almost nothing on the walls. So, and those were my paintings, right? So they stood on their own. And they could be moved in all kinds of ways, so yeah, so it was really wonderful. I didn't know what the response would be, but you just do what you have to do, or you feel like doing, and you take your own risks. You have to in the studio.
I think that's a really great moment to open up for questions. Thank you so much, Candida.
Thank you.
It's okay if there aren't any also.
What?
Yeah. Oh, good, we have.
Hello, good evening. My question is, what material did you use for the display? Is it glass or is it like what you painted on? Because it doesn't look like canvas.
You mean here?
Yes.
Oh, this is a plastic. It's used for, with outdoor banners.
Okay,
That's what it is. It's banner, quote unquote, material.
Oh, okay.
So it lives outside. It could live outside. And it's, so it's printed, right, with a kind of laser ink finish. But these are not meant to go outside. These are meant to stay inside.
Okay. And I have another question. So have you done installations or just paintings or sculpture? I'm just trying to figure out.
I've done it all.
Okay. I see. Okay.
This was a fun project. This is my first elevator bank, kind of. I guess that's what they call it. It's a mall, fashion outlet in Chicago, which I never had been to until this. And it was the first time that I actually had to conceive of a space like this. And it was interesting because this one, somebody actually painted it on the wall with scaffolding. I was not going to do it, but my idea came from another painting that I had made, and so I kind of liked the way it looked, though. I mean, I like the energy in it, right? I think there's something about scaling up that just feels good to me. I just love like sort of occupying space that is outside of the studio space, right? There's something about that I really like.
Well, the work is speaking so directly to the world, and there's so much that you're taking from it that it feels appropriate.
Sits well.
It sits so well.
Thank you.
I do have one. This is one more. There was one that you showed. It looked like the East River waterfront, but I believe that's Chicago. Yes, because initially I thought it was the East River waterfront in Manhattan. But so have you done? Is this the first? What is that word? Like project like this, like that
On the
big?
waterfront?
Yes.
Yes, and maybe there'll be more.
And then you have one forthcoming, right? A forthcoming project?
The one at the terminal?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, I think it was mentioned in the.
Yes.
Yes. There will be a public space unveiling, I don't know when, but at Terminal 6, the new Terminal 6 for JFK.
Oh,
but it will be a mosaic floor piece, so you can step all over my painting.
So it's gonna be on the floor, like mosaic floor.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
There's several of us in that terminal, and they're like, I want to say 12-foot diameter circles. It was just, I have not seen it yet. I mean, I can't wait to step all over the work.
With your Comme des Garçons.
With my, no.
Combat boots.
Thank you for your questions.
I'm curious about this process of taking something you've come up with in the studio and mapping it onto something like a facade or these very large-scale, public-facing, monumental-sized surfaces, and the ways in which that shift in scale changes the read of the image. Are there times when you feel, having seen it at a certain scale, there's a revision or a change you need to make? And if so, how do you handle that? Or are you kind of making peace with the fact that once you let it out of your studio in the maquette form, it's out of your hands?
I don't really feel that. I don't really respond to it that way. I see it as a challenge to create something new. And I kind of understand the dynamics of scale and what it does to perception. And so I know that the paintings that I make in the studio are made in the studio, and they have a certain relationship to my eye, right, and to my body. And they're usually smaller in scale, they're more intimate. But I appreciate, intimacy can exist on so many different levels, right? And so I think for me, it's not like, I'm already kind of sensing what it's gonna look like, right? And so I don't really feel, I think the only thing that I do feel is always at the end of it, you don't really know what that's gonna feel like, absolutely, right? To be honest, you don't really know, but there's a nice feeling about it. I kind of like losing control of something, right? There's something about the mystery of creativity that I really get nourished by. And so I think that radicality is like, it's already a kind of liberation that one has to have with the creative process. Like I kind of let things happen as they want to happen, That makes sense. I don't try to cradle an idea. I like to I start with a basic notation about where I want to go, but even that gets buried within the painting process itself. So I'm very used to finding things and losing them, and then finding them again, and then losing them completely into something else. So that part of me is very much me, and so I don't hold on to a kind of perception of what the painting should be, and that's not true for a lot of artists, but that's who I am. I just kind of let it go, because I know that in the engagement with time and space, that the relation will always be different, right? So, but I guess that liberation is something that I've worked very hard to gain, right? And I think teaching for so many years, there is something about permissions and the idea that as an artist, you should break all your own rules. You should be willing to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be pretty boring.
Well said.
We have a question from Zoom. Sorry. I would love to learn more about your choice of writing Estoy Bien into the piece from air paintings that was part of El Museo's triennial, especially after what you mentioned experiencing in 2017 with your father's passing and Hurricane Maria.
Okay. Estoy bien could be a lie. To feel good, estoy bien, I am good, could be a lie. It's a holding place. When the hurricane happened in Puerto Rico, there were a lot of camera crews running around, interviewing people who had all this loss. And for many, it was the first question was, well, how do you feel? So a lot of people would say, estoy bien. What do you want to say? I mean, the trauma of that, right? It was a holding space. Those words are holding. So I was responding to that, really. And I wanted to that's kind of what I was holding on to, because I know it couldn't be well, but you're not going to tell your whole story there. Well, I just lost my house, and they didn't, they were on camera because there were a lot of people. We couldn't find a lot of people, so some of these people were hoping that their family members would hear them, and that they didn't want your family members to worry, that they were okay because they were still alive, even though their houses, collapsed, or they had to live under a blue tarp, But it was just the mechanics of. It was just listening to that vibration of the two words, estoy bien, and it not really being really what I felt. I was very unsettled during that time, not knowing where my mother and sister were. But I had to keep working and living. So estoy bien is like a holding spot, right? It's a way to hold a state of being that could keep you going, right? It's just like a prayer for some people. But it's not really that they were really feeling okay, right? So, but I just kept hearing it over and over again, and it became like this mantra for that time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's why I started with that, and ended with it, actually, So and it just kind of came out naturally. I never thought I would show these pieces, so it wasn't like I was going for anything for an audience. It was really pieces that I was doing for myself.
Hi, thank you so much. I was curious about if you could talk more about your process in the studio. Like, do you rework your paintings a lot? Have you always worked abstractly? I was just curious about your trajectory from art school to now in terms of development. Thank you.
That's a long question, but I would say that when I was in school, first of all, I had to believe I was an artist. I didn't even know I was until, I had one of the most amazing teachers, Susan Crow, who's still alive, and Jack Whitney, who has passed, who believed in me. And Jack in particular said to me, Candida, if you made these paintings big enough, you would get scholarships or something. He's something like that, which gave me a ground to believe that I could be an artist, right? Like, there are moments, so listen to your teachers. They might be actually saying something that could give you stamina for your future. There's no guarantees in this business. You don't always know what it is. I had no name for what I was interested in, but I knew there was something special about it. And so it took me a few years. I didn't go right to, after I graduated as an undergrad, I didn't go directly to grad school. It took many years to go back. But I went to the community. I went to a Museo del Barrio, which was a place for me to grow and thrive in. And so I met other artists. I learned about the work of Romare Beard in there. You know, I was crossing the street in so many ways that I tell you, you know, just to keep going. And there's no one way of being successful at this. The best way is to work hard and to face your fears and have tons of courage. But anyway, to go back to this idea of abstraction and representation, well, like everybody else, you know, we were learning these things. Oh, there are categories. Oh, you're either a figurative painter or you're an abstract painter. And I tried everything. I mean, I was trying to paint from the model. I tried landscape. I did all of that. And I think that you have to, as a young artist or, you know, somebody who's just beginning, you have to try all those things. But at the end of the day, I'm sort of at a point in my life where I really don't like to talk about paintings as abstract or figurative. I really feel like it's a space, always been a space in between that. And so abstraction for me is a living practice. It is the way I experience things. It's the way I remember things. It's the way I put things together. So I think I like to paint paintings that surprise me. And so, yeah, it's been many years, and I could have never predicted the kind of work that I'm doing. I didn't really, I think that idea, though, of sourcing, you know, of looking outside of yourself is really important, of finding material that you are seduced by or confused by. So you have to have the yin and yang. You have to love it and you have to hate it too. It's so you have to have all of that to find your way in and out. As artists, we're creatives, which means that we have to break barriers down. We can't go by definitions. We have to always have courage to kind of cross the street and take a risk. There's no rules that can't be broken. And so I think the artist is really about having courage. And materiality is your choice. You know, you want to work with acrylics, you want to work with oils, you want to, you know, work with dirt, you know, you want to work with, you know, writing. You know, you could do anything you want, really. I don't feel like, I think we make a mistake when we start talking about divisions and hierarchies, like one thing is better than the other. But I really basically feel that I just want to make, I just need to make something. Like, I feel like I have to work with my hands and I like the way that I can dismantle my everyday life into something that feels concrete, or that's something that I can look at. But then it's like, I guess writing, I'm really hard. I always wanted to be a writer, but I'm more like a poet, I think. I can write 4 words, and that's enough for me. An essay, forget it, you know. I think you just have to figure out what you're good at. And nobody can really tell you what that is, but you have a lot of guidance. There's so many people here who have so much intelligence and brilliance, and you just try to absorb as much as you can while you're in school, because that's what it's about. And you have to fail. You'd have to fail in order to get up, to realize that what you're not about. I think finding out what you don't want to do is probably more important than finding out what you want to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.